You're listening to the Old Dirty Boston podcast. ODB Rundowns are short intros to important stories, topics, and people connected to the city of Boston. In this rundown, I'll tell you about the 1991 Boston Chinatown Massacre. Hear the tale of Toothless Wah and the big boss of Little Chinatown, the Sky Dragon. On January 12, 1991, three men, Toothless Wah, Johnny Chung, and Hung Tien Pham, rolled out of the Naked Eye strip club and into a snowy Boston night. They took the 2-minute walk along Beach Street into Boston's Chinatown and down the steps of 14 Tyler Street into a small, unassuming gambling den. Moments later, the men yelled, "Robbery!" Forcing everyone to the ground. The killers then proceeded to execute 5 men at close range. Investigators said the residue of gunpowder showed the butt of the gun had been pressed up against the back of the victims' heads, execution style. One man escaped alive, Mr. Lee, also known as Wrinkled Skin Man. The bullet he took to the head fractured his skull, but spared his life, leaving him as the only surviving witness to the murders of 5 men. Mr. Lee was able to drag himself out onto Tyler Street, yelling for help. Former Boston Police Commissioner Evans said the scene was one of the most violent crimes that I've seen in my 30 years with the Boston Police Department. The Tyler Street Club was one of about a dozen illegal gambling parlors operating in Chinatown in the early 1990s. Chinatown is an insular neighborhood. The police generally left them alone as the games were peaceful and truly part of cultural life in Chinatown. There were even schedules posted for games on surrounding lampposts. Some parlors, like Tyler Street, hosted bigger games that reach up to 6 figures. Homes, restaurants, and businesses were on the line. The future of families was decided on those tables, said one longtime Chinatown resident. Gambling was the lifeblood of organized crime in Chinatown. High-interest loans, protection, and profit skimming were commonplace. Whoever controlled these games controlled these rackets. The bigger the bets, the more valuable the room. These murders were part of an Asian gang war raging between Chinese and Vietnamese triads in Boston's Chinatown. One man, Stephen Se, known as Sky Dragon, was the undisputed king of organized crime in Chinatown. Sky Dragon was originally from Hong Kong, a member of the 14K Triads, a criminal organization with roots dating back to 17th century mainland China. When Sky Dragon first arrived in Boston from Hong Kong, he began recruiting Chinese immigrants as members to his faction known as the Ping An Gang. He also owned the Kung Fu restaurant on Tyler Street. By the early 80s, Ping An had taken control of gambling, prostitution, loan sharking, drugs, and extortion in the insular Chinatown neighborhood. Sky Dragon and the Ping An maintained a strong and relatively peaceful control over Chinatown. That control was shaken in 1984 when Sky Dragon was jailed for refusing to testify before a presidential commission on Asian organized crime. At the same time, there was a major influx of Vietnamese immigrants, fueled by people fleeing the communist government in Vietnam, and continued armed conflict throughout Southeast Asia. From 1980 to 1990, Boston's Asian population doubled. Many Vietnamese families found homes in Dorchester, content to start fresh in America and work for the betterment of their coming generations. Others carried over what they had learned fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. These Vietnamese gangsters had a hard edge. Accustomed to violence, murder was nothing new to them. The U.S. prison cell was still like the Ritz-Carlton compared to what many of them had escaped. Even today, you'll notice that the Vietnamese restaurants are centralized on Lower Washington near Neelan Street. That was the combat zone. That was the edge of Chinatown. The Vietnamese were forced to squeeze in between the strip clubs and the streetwalkers, unwelcomed in Chinatown proper. When Sky Dragon returned to Boston in February of '86, he was faced with the reality that his Ping An gang was under threat. To reestablish a balance of control, the Asian gangs of Chinatown went to war. Between 1988 and 1992, there were 24 homicides and 155 weapons charges filed in the District of Chinatown. Sky Dragon's spot as the king of Chinatown was being challenged, and that shift of power may explain what led to the violent massacre at 14 Tyler Street in '91. It may also answer why the killers yelled "robbery," but left the victims' cash and valuables untouched. First, let's look at the shooters. All three shooters, including Toothless Hua, worked for Sky Dragon and the gambling arm of the Ping An gang. Of the three, Hung Tien Pham was by far the highest in rank. Born in Vietnam, Pham was ethnically Chinese and remains the only shooter to avoid capture. Hung Tien Pham liked nice cars and expensive cognac. He ran at least 2 gambling dens, prostitution, and an offshoot of Sky Dragon's drug business. He had a clear interest in preserving the power of Sky Dragon and the Ping An gang. In 1988, a man named Dai Kung arrived in Boston's Chinatown. Dai was part of the San Francisco-based mafia known as the Whole Earth Society. He claimed one of Sky Dragon's Ping An members owed him $30,000 for green cards he paid for, but were never delivered. Sky Dragon heard the request, and the men agreed to a settlement below the original number of $30,000. Dai Kung then made a request. He wanted Sky Dragon to make the payment through his Kung Fu restaurant. Sky Dragon, recognizing this as a test of power from the Whole Earth Society, exploded in anger. "Have I died? Am I no longer here?" he yelled, according to an affidavit of an FBI informant. Sky Dragon then gave the order to find Dai Kung and any Whole Earth Society associates in Boston. Shoot them in the balls and in the head. Call Hung Tien Pham. Tell him to bring out the heavy metal, Sky Dragon said. On December 29th, 1988, Sky Dragon's men spotted Dai Kung across a parking lot in the middle of Chinatown, between Tyler Street and Harrison. Hung Tien Pham pulled out an Uzi and at 11 p.m. sprayed bullets across cars and buildings, but failed to hit any of his targets. Dai Kung survived, and no one was killed. After the failed attempt on his life, Dai Kung fled to New York, where he recruited gang members, planning to return to Boston to assassinate Sky Dragon and overthrow the Ping An gang. Sky Dragon also left Boston and returned to Hong Kong. It would take almost 3 years, but both men would end up back in Boston's Chinatown. In the end, Dai Kung lay dead, shot in the head, along with 4 other men in the basement of 14 Tyler Street. After a 10-year manhunt, 2 of the men involved in the shooting, Toothless Hua and Johnny Chung, were arrested in mainland China and were surprisingly extradited back to the U.S. to serve out life sentences. In the mid-90s, Sky Dragon would be convicted and sent to prison on federal racketeering charges. Hung Tien Pham, the Ping An lieutenant, remains at large. I had never heard about the 1991 Tyler Street Massacre in Boston's Chinatown. I actually spent years living and traveling around China. I speak Chinese, and I believe very deeply in Chinese culture and philosophy. That being said, I have never felt welcome in Boston's Chinatown. It is a world of its own, and I can say with full confidence that the men and women who run Chinatown have no interest in outside interference. They are content to manage matters internally. For Americans in Chinatown, we will always be a guest. I would like to end this story with a quote from Sun Tzu's Art of War. "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt."